Hello, everybody. So in this video, I want to do a brief introduction to what is called R Markdown. So this is going to be a very nice way of sharing your work with others, your work in R with others, in particular, sharing homework, submitting homework to me. So before we get going, I'm assuming that you've already installed R and R Studio on your computer and you've run basic commands using the console as we've been doing in class. And we're also going to need to use a package called resample data. So I am assuming you've installed that package. And if you've done all of those things, then you're ready to get going. So let's start with a fresh R Studio. So I want to make sure that you're opening up R Studio. So that's what we're looking at on my desktop. And let's open up a fresh document. So I'm going to go to File, New File, and rather than click R Markdown, I just want a plain empty text file to get going. So I'm going to open up a new text file, and that gets created up here. And so before we get going, let's save this file someplace. And whatever folder we save this file in, just be aware the corresponding output that we get from this file is also going to be saved to that same folder. So I'm going to save this, let's say, over onto my desktop. And I'm going to call this practice. You can call it whatever you want. And then I have a file extension. This is the important part, which is .R md. So this is the file extension for R Markdown files. So I'm going to save this file, and now I've got a file called practice.rmd open, where before we've had our R scripts. And so you might be thinking, what exactly is R? And if you go over to the help and open up R Markdown quick reference, this is really, really useful to have open while you are working in R Markdown. So this gives us a lot of shortcuts for how you might want to format your text in these documents, including how we can put inline R code commands as well as R code blocks or chunks into our document. So what R Markdown is, as you can see, nicely summarized by one sentence up here, it's an easy to write plain text format for creating dynamic documents and reports. So what the dynamic part means is in this document is going to both be the R code that you use to execute certain commands along with the output of those commands. And those are going to be in the document so that when you share it with somebody else and they open up your R Markdown file, they have the same code and they can recreate all of the output that you created. So let's begin. Let's imagine we're working on a homework assignment. So I'm going to call this sample homework. And by putting £1, that means we've got this at the biggest header level. And then I'm going to put at header 2 my name, spelled correctly. Great. And just like we have been working with scripts, right at the start of your document, you should indicate what are all of the libraries that you're going to need to check out in order for the code to run. So for us, there's going to be one library that we want. And so what I'm first typing is text that's going to appear in the output of this document. So this is not our code. The double asterisk here means this is going to be in bold. So I'm just going to type here. The first thing we want to do is load the required packages. And anytime I want to enter R code in a big chunk, we're going to type 3 of these sort of apostrophe looking symbols. And so this is the apostrophe. We want to be sure that it's going in the right direction. This should be the key that's right next to the number 1, probably on your keyboard, probably just below the escape key. And so we're going to do 3 of those and then in curly braces R. So this tells the document right now, don't actually type what I'm typing here, but this is going to be R code. And when we compile this, we're going to see both the R code nicely typeset along with the corresponding output. So first, all I want to do is enter the library command. And the package, again, that we're going to check out is called resample data, since we're going to use the flight delays data set in this package. And this is the only one that we're going to need. So I'm going to close that off with the same 3 looking apostrophes below it. So this just is what is called a chunk code over here, or code chunk. And let's say now our first question of the homework assignment is how many flights in the data set, flight delays, and again, this data set needs the package resample data, were operated by each airline. And so in order to answer this question, we're going to enter some R code. So I'm going to type that in, the same indicator. And let's create this output. So we're going to send this output to airline. And one way that we can count up how many flights were operated by each airline would be to say, go into the data set flight delays and check out the variable carrier. And before we get any further, let's just see what happens if we enter this code over here. And so how we compile this in R Markdown is using this knit button up top. And so we can create output to an HTML file, a PDF file, or a Word document. You're welcome to play around with any of those options. I might suggest HTML, since this is the most universally easy file type to share. The user doesn't need to have Word. Maybe the person you're sharing this with doesn't have Word or has a different type of PDF viewer. So I'm going to knit this to HTML. And down below, you can see it compiled a bunch of stuff in the console, and here's the output. And we can look at this side by side with the R Markdown file over here. So here's header 1, here's header 2, here was the bold text, here was the library command, here was the output of that library command, and here was the text. We had an ordered list. This was the first thing in the ordered list, and here was the code. But notice we don't see any output as a result of this. And so we can tweak these code chunks to do various things, like we can skip evaluating it, we can say hide the R code but only show the output, and so on. So this is very, very much able to be fine-tuned. And so let's play around with some of the options that we can use with this R chunk code. So over here, we don't want to see that annoying message that we get with the Titanic data set not loading correctly. So there's an option for this called message, and I'm going to set that by default. The message option is set to true. I'm going to turn that off by typing false in capital letters without quotes. So this is going to still execute that chunk of code, which is just 1 line library, but it's not going to show the corresponding message that came out of that. And down below, this line of code over here didn't show any output because we saved this output to airline. And so if I actually want to show the table that was saved to airline, we can just type the line of code airline, and now it's going to both create that table and show the corresponding output. So let's go ahead and knit this. And by default, I have it set to be knit to HTML, so I don't have to separately choose HTML each time. If I just check the knit button, it's going to create an HTML document. And now you can see that the message beneath the library chunk is gone. And because I added airline here, we can now see the corresponding counts of those airlines. And just like we can create graphics are nice ways to do this. Let's say I also want to come up with a bar plot to display this data. So I can add some sub items to my list by putting the plus sign here. So I can say here is a table displaying the counts. And then down here, I'm going to add another bullet here's bar plot illustrating the counts. And now we're going to put in some R code. So we're going to go like this. And this is just one simple line of R code is going to do this for us. So now that I saved that table to airline, I can put bar plot airline over here. And so whatever code we've executed, I don't need to re-enter that down over here. This object airline has been created, so I could read it into my next code chunk. And let's see what happens now if we execute all of this, we knit all of this. Now we can see we've got question 1. Here's the table displaying it. Here's bar plot illustrating the counts. And here's the command, the R code, and here's the corresponding output. So this saves a whole lot of trouble on your end. You don't have to copy and paste things into Microsoft Word. When you submit this, you can do all of your work in R and then just knit it, and it creates this nice document that you can upload and submit to me. And so in interest of time, I am going to open up a file that I posted in Canvas just to show you some other options that we could do. And I don't think I need to type them out in the recording. I just opened the document called intro.Rmd. You can find this in Canvas. It has pretty much what we just went through up here. And down below, I just have, say, a second question. If it asked us to compare distributions of flight lengths for both of these airlines, we've discussed these commands in class. We could create these two R chunks over here, these two chunk codes over here, and display the output along with the R code. What I want to illustrate down at the bottom is we can also put inline R commands. So these commands, the 3 of these, and then the R in curly brackets, this kind of chunks it off into those little boxes of R code. And then we see the output afterwards. With these inline commands, it's just one of those, and then R, and then some R code. So this is useful if you're doing like one simple command, like what is the mean flight length of the American Airlines? I just would put it in inline R code like this. And I have a similar one for United over there. And so if I knit this, we see all of the previous results. And now here in this second question, here was the American airline subsetted and then plotted the histogram compared to United down below. And this is what it looks like when we do an inline R command. And so we can also format the output in bold or italics if we like down below as well. But here we just see the output and we don't actually see the R code embedded in the document as well. So at the very end of this document, I put some links, some useful links. These are also up in Canvas where you can go and play around with all of the various nuts and bolts of R Markdown. I just wanted to give you a little push to get you going with R Markdown. And so, for example, the cheat sheet, that looks like this. It's just front and back, one pager. And these are particularly nice things to check out. These options for embedding codes and the various options about what gets displayed, whether the output gets displayed, whether the R code gets displayed, and so on. Okay, so your quiz is going to just go over some of the basics with R Markdown. And in class, we'll do some more work with permutation tests and documenting them with R Markdown documents.